we'll kick off now then. So welcome everyone, and thanks a lot for joining this ESG VC webinar, on which we're going to focus on environmental life cycle analysis. My name is Leslie Capin, and I'm the Director of Impact and Sustainability at Astanor. Today, I'll be joined by Isabelle Demorand, Senior Sustainability Consultant at Quantis. For those who don't know Quantis, Quantis is an expert in the sustainability field by guiding organizations to really define, shape, and implement sustainable solutions. We are also joined by Kendra Quinn, the impact lead at Notpla. Notpla is one of our mission-driven companies based in the UK that has developed a sustainable alternative to single-use plastic. Before we kick off this webinar, just a few words on ESG VC. I'm sure you're all aware, but just as a little reminder, ESG VC was successfully launched by Beringia a bit more than a year ago. Again, a huge thanks to Henry Philipson and Karen McCormick for leading the initiative. And the initiative is supported by steering committee members, so ourselves at Astanor, but also Atomico, Beringia, Lexstar, Par Equity, Seedcamp, Thales, and BVCA. So the main mission of the initiative was really to support and standardize ESG reporting for early stage companies as well as VC investors. So there's an ESG framework that I'm sure many of you have seen already that has been developed as a tool to really kick off ESG reporting, but also to identify where portfolio companies might need further support to reach high ESG standards. And to further support startups and investors, the steering committee members are also organizing monthly webinars like the one for today to deep dive into specific topics that we think are important for the community. So ESG VC was initially a UK and become like a pan-European initiative. And in fact, there's more and more appetite from the US early stage companies as well as investors to actually benefit and take part of the initiative. So going forward, we'll make sure that we pick a time that is convenient for US counterparts for the upcoming webinars. So for now, for the next 40 minutes, we are going to focus on the specific topic of today, which is environmental life cycle analysis. So what is the objective for today? I will start with an overview on why, in our view, it is essential for investors as well as for a startup to go through the process of an environmental LCA. Then I will leave the floor to Isabelle from Quantis to deep dive into the topic. And then you'll then get a practical case with the view from a startup with Kendra from Notpla. And at the end, we should hopefully get a bit of time for Q&A. So we're just going to launch the presentation. Super. Next one, yeah. So why did we start to do LCA 3 years ago? First, I might give you a bit of background on Astanor. So Astanor is an impact VC fund dedicated to the agri-food sector. We invest through the entire agri-food value chain. As we tend to say, we invest from the soil and the sea to the guts. So as an impact investor, measuring our impact creation is really core to our DNA. And we have developed an internal approach to measure our impact on both the people and the planet. So that's what you can see on the bottom right of the chart. We have 6 impact KPIs. So we invest in mission-driven companies which have identified a problem and they found a solution to solve this problem. So they have developed either a product or a service that is going to have a positive impact on the planet, the people, or even on both. So to give you an example, as an agri-food investor, it could be about a solution that avoids greenhouse gas emission, that provides an increased remuneration to farmers, or that reduces land usage. What we realized 3 years ago is that in order to truly assess the environmental impact of our portfolio company solution, there was a need for LCA. There was a need for really science-based data to actually quantify and forecast the environmental effects of our portfolio companies. So, for instance, we all know that replacing cheese or meat with a plant-based alternative or removing single-use plastic by seaweed will have a positive impact on the people on the planet. But the question really is, what is the real, actual impact on the people on the planet of these solutions? So as an impact investor, LCA allows us to be fully informed on the impact of our investees. It allows us to fully grasp, measure, and track the impact creation of our companies. So if we move on to, just in a nutshell, as I will leave the floor to Isabel to go in depth into the technicalities of LCAs. I just wanted to provide a brief overview of what is the LCA, but more importantly, on what it is not. I was chatting with my sister over the weekend, who is also in the field, and I realized that there was some confusion around LCA and company carbon footprint. So I just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page today. An LCA is not a company carbon footprint. A company carbon footprint is really a summary of all the greenhouse gas emissions of an organization. I'm sure you are all really familiar with the 3 scopes of the greenhouse gas protocol, which is the standard approach to assess a corporate or company carbon footprint. It's an approach that is now becoming widely required for regulation purposes, as it is already the case, at least in Europe. So you can see on the top right here, the 3 scopes. So the scope 1, which is the direct emissions, the scope 2, which is the indirect emissions, like the purchased electricity, and the scope 3, which is more or less everything else from business trip, employee commute, and any purchase that a company will do. On the other end, an environmental LCA of a product provides all the required information to fully assess the environmental performance through the entire life cycle of a product, from what we call the cradle to the grave. So as you can see on the bottom right, it will be from raw materials extraction to actually the end of life of the product. So important to keep in mind that when we say environmental, what we mean is the impact of your product, not only in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but also things like water use or biodiversity. So while the company carbon footprint looks at the entire organization, an LCA is only looking at a specific product or service of the company. While the company carbon footprint is only providing information on greenhouse gas emissions, LCAs are providing information on all the environmental impacts of a specific product. So while the company carbon footprint is done annually, like 2021 or fiscal year, the LCA is done on the full lifetime of a specific product. So both approaches are important and in a way complementary. And actually, when you go through an LCA, it will provide very valuable information to more accurately assess the scope 3 emissions. Environmental LCAs follow really standardized methodology, which will bring reliability and transparency into the market. So why is it important for a startup? We understand why it makes sense for an investor, but what does it make sense for a startup? As a startup, this knowledge will really empower the founders. Don't think about it as being a painful exercise. I mean, clearly it requires data and time from the team, but with this data, founders will have information that allow them to make more sustainable and more precise strategic decisions. So for instance, the purchasing department of the company can learn where and how they should source their raw materials. Product designers can explore how their design choices will affect the sustainability of the product. And consumers can learn how sustainable the product is. It really allows the company to better market their product and clearly support the environmental benefits of their innovation. What's important is that as a startup, you're coming to disrupt the existing incumbents, the existing solutions. So what is important is not only to understand the impact of your product, but actually to understand how it compares to the existing widely used solutions. So that's what we call a comparative LCA. If I give you the example of Insect, which is one of our French company that is producing insect protein, they went to an LCA years ago and they learned a lot about how to make their products more sustainable. But actually, this insect protein is addressing several markets, such as fish feed, human protein, and pet food. So as you can imagine, each of these markets will have very different impact on the planet. So for instance, for the fish feed market, it will essentially be a positive impact on the biodiversity of the oceans by avoiding further depleting the ocean fish stocks and avoiding bycatch. While if you think about the human protein, it will essentially be about greenhouse gas emissions and land biodiversity. So understanding your product and understanding how it compares to the market will really guide through the life of the company. So on the next one, so what happened? How do we support portfolio companies as investors? All companies, startups need guidance. So over the last 3 years, we've been supporting them to go through the whole process. First, what we've done is that we've built partnerships with LCA experts like Quantis and Ecometrics. We don't do the LCA in-house. What's important as well is to guide our companies through the process. It is really central to the way we do things. So we extensively discuss the benefits and the different ways to conduct an LCA. So for instance, in addition of going through an LCA with experts such as Quantis or Ecometrics, we've also guided our portfolio companies through different type of approaches, such as going through universities, and you hear more about that, or even through internal hiring. I give you the example of Appeal, which is one of our US-based company, which has developed a coating that they put on fruit and vegetable to extend the shelf life of the produce. So at Appeal, they have, I think, 2 or 3 people within the team, in the internal team of LCA experts. And the team is really running the LCA on a dynamic basis. So every time they actually add a fruit or a vegetable, they can refresh their numbers on an ongoing basis. But then what is essential with this approach is that to get the LCA externally reviewed and validated. And so, for instance, Appeal's LCAs are actually ISO certified by Quantis. Our role is also to guide through the question of timing. And LCA should not be done too early when the recipe is not finalized or the process is not finalized, but it should also be done not too late. Because at the same time, you want to ensure that the company grow with the right practices in place. So the information they will get from the LCAs are essential. So, and at the end, clearly our role is to partner with our portfolio companies to review the results and to set up a plan with them to move forward on the sustainability journey. So to really leverage this information to build a company for the scale-up. So hopefully by now, you should have a good overview of the benefits of going through an environmental LCA. And I will let Isabelle and Kendra really deep dive into the topic and bring additional perspective on the value adds of environmental LCAs.
Thank you, Leslie. I'll let you go through the slides for me. Yeah, okay, thanks. So I will give you a quick overview of Quantis activities, even though Leslie has already presented it, but just to give you a wide overview. And then I will try to deep dive into how we conduct LCA and what are the benefits and how it works. But please feel free to share any questions that you may have at the end of this session. And finally, I will present you a bit of information of how we work, the kind of services that we can provide to guide you through an LCA. So Quantis, as Leslie mentioned it, is we are a sustainability consultancy. We partner with companies in different sectors, mainly the food and agriculture sector, but also fashion and cosmetics. So basically FMCGs mainly. And we bridge the gap between science, sustainability, and businesses. So our goal is really to guide top organizations to define, shape, and implement environmental solutions. And we help them build a strategy that will help them grow and contribute in a positive way to our economy. You can move to the next slide. Thanks. We have a global approach because we are based in different countries, mainly in Europe, but also in the US. And that gives us the opportunity to have a better understanding of the different dynamics that occur on the planet. For instance, regarding deforestation, we won't have the same problematics if we source our product from one part or another in the world. And also regarding regulations, companies in France or in Germany don't have the same problematics as the one that are based in the US. So the way regulations and geographical implementation of the companies impact the way they're doing business is key for us, and having teams that are localized in different parts of the world allow us to take into account these specificities. So today we are about 200 consultants based in different parts, and we've been working with companies for almost 15 years. At the beginning, Quantis was a spin-off of the Polytechnical School of Lausanne. We are researchers, and those researchers actually worked on the philosophy of LCA and begin to create the first LCA. So we were really at the root of this methodology. How we work is that we try to go from a really science-based and metric-based approach. So we conduct LCA, we conduct corporate footprint, we conduct product footprint, as Leslie described it earlier. But this is not like, the idea is not to remain in figures. The idea is to transform and to translate those metrics into strategies. So what we usually do is that based on the assessment and the picture that we have taken from the impact of a company, we are able to build a strategy. Either it is regarding climate, which is the big focus at the moment, but we know that having a strategy on other environmental aspects is key at the moment to avoid transfer of impact. For instance, you can take a good decision regarding GHG emission, but this may have other impacts on biodiversity or water depletion. So the idea is to have a global overview. And we also work hand in hand with different initiatives. For instance, the science-based targets, you probably have heard of it. It is an initiative that help companies set a target and define a pathway to reach these targets over a mid-term and a long-term vision. Once we have set a target and built a strategy, the idea is to monitor the strategy. So we try to equip the company that we work with tools. And finally, we know that your clients, your customers will probably need to understand the efforts that you are making and the decisions that you are taking. So we also try to translate the actions that you are implementing within your strategy into communication supports. So it can either be reports or sustainable development reports, but also packaging information, labeling for the product that you are selling. But we are trying to make sure that we avoid any greenwashing. That is really important for us, that consumers get a clear understanding of what you're doing. So today, just to give you like a few metrics, we're working with hundreds of companies on their strategy. We have performed more than 150 climate strategies, and all the strategy that we have built and that were submitted to the science-based target were validated. And we have conducted many corporate footprints. When we are talking about corporate footprints, we are talking either about carbon footprints, but we can also assess biodiversity losses or impact on water depletion in a footprint. So corporate can be multi-indicators as the LCA can be. So what we have experimented also with the work that we have done with Astanor and the investees that we have worked with is that being able to work internationally and to gather different kind of profile within countries help us guide companies and provide a full service. So from really the bottom and the metrics to the communication, because we are not only engineers, we have also communication experts, consultants that have expertise in change management, and we also provide strategic insight based on benchmarking and sectorial analysis, so as to put into perspective the metrics and the figures with a pragmatic approach that is making the link with your business and the challenges that you are facing in your day-to-day life. The pathway that we usually follow with a company. So we start by understanding. This is why we conduct LCA or corporate footprints. It's also a step where we like to provide trainings because to give you the right tools and the right key to really use the results that we share with you, it is important that you have a good understanding of the challenges. Then we set the targets. They can either be on climate, but they can be on other environmental challenges. And then this is usually the hardest part, is to execute. So to build the action plan and to also engage either when we are working with big companies, their board, because usually operational teams are very convinced, but sometimes the top management is more difficult to make aware. And the second part is also to monitor the performance of the strategy that we are implementing. And finally, communication. And at each of these steps, we provide guidance and solutions. We will zoom on LCA to show you how the LCA will help you go through the whole pathway. So LCA is a way to do eco-design. Eco-design is not only for packaging, where we can or to build something. It is also useful to build a solution or a new product from cradle, as Leslie mentioned it, to grave. So it's a way to put into perspective the service and the service design and development as a whole. To give you an example, the typical question that we usually have when we conduct an LCA is that we want to compare two products. So shall I choose a plastic bag or a paper bag? You can move to the next slide. The usual question that we have is that, okay, plastic weighs less, but paper comes from trees and not oil, but the forests are overused, but the paper is shipped from Brazil away, but the plastic comes from China. So it is very hard and difficult to know which parameters to take into account, and between two solutions that seems to be like to have pros and cons, how to make the right decision and assess which one is the right one. What we do is that we look at every step of the life cycle. So for instance, for plastic and paper bag, we will have a look at the production phase and the extraction phase of raw material, which is the main contributors in the two options. But you see the one in the middle, that the extraction part for paper bag is much lower than the extraction part for polypropylene bag, so the PP bag. So we came up to the conclusion that paper bag was a better option than plastic bag, but we have to go into a higher level of details, and so you can differentiate different kind of plastics, and depending on the kind of plastic, the answer will not be as black and white as it could be. As you can see, some kind of specific plastic bag can have a lower impact than some paper bag. To work on LCA, we go through every single step of the life cycle. We can isolate some of them, but what we do is that we collect data and information, what we call primary data. So this allows us to make the life cycle assessment. To make the life cycle assessment, we use those data, and we use big databases and inventories in which we have emission factors or impact factors. So for instance, we know that when we extract, for instance, a certain quantity of a raw material, this will release within the atmosphere a certain quantity of greenhouse gases, for instance. And at every step of the LCA, we will put a quantity, a volume, a physical activity with an emission or an impact factor. And we make a sum out of it, and we use a methodology recommended by the IPCC, for instance, to normalize those impacts and be able to analyze different type of environmental impacts. So what we usually have a look at is the carbon, water, ecosystem quality, so which means biodiversity, natural resources, and human health. But we can also have a look at other indicators that are recommended by the PEF, which is the product environmental footprint, that is very used in Europe, but also used in the US. So one advantage of the LCA is that it is multi-criteria compared to a carbon footprint that is only on carbon. So as a conclusion on the benefit associated to LCA is that it offers you a way to compare different solutions and to choose the most appropriate one. And it allows also to avoid shifting burdens. Since we are looking at every stages and at different indicators, we are not lacking a part of the analysis. We are having a whole picture. We see the whole picture. This also allows us to identify the hotspots. So if we see that the extraction of the raw materials is representing 50% or 70% of the impact, we will have a deeper analysis on this, and we will let go the rest. Not let go, but we will really put our attention and the work on this part. And this is a very good way because it's very understandable. LCA are a very good tool to create conversation either with stakeholders or with customers or with other colleagues within your company. So it's a good decision-making tool indeed. It's a good way, as I just mentioned it, to assess the hotspot, to identify the improvement possibilities and how to optimize, because you can see, you can make what we call sensitivity analysis. So you can look at a special hotspot and make scenarios and comparison in which you say, okay, if I change this particular material by another material, or if I lower the proportion of this kind of material, what is the impact on my product? And you have automatic results, and you can make comparison, and this helps you take decisions. It's also a good way to benchmark yourself comparing to other companies, because a lot of LCA results are public when they are done with the ISO methodology that I will just present you in a few seconds. And it's also a way to see if you are better or not to a competitor. And if you are not, you can also explain it, because you can put into perspective some specific advantages of your product. So the different steps to conduct those LCA is to define the goal and scope. It's the key step, because when we do an LCA, we define what we call a functional unit. So for instance, for food, today we are looking at the kilograms that are produced, but a right functional unit would be, for instance, the nutritional quality of a product. And so for the same quantity, if you have a better nutritive quality, it would be interesting to use this functional unit, and then to assess the impact based on this functional unit. Then we collect the data, we check it to make sure that the data are have a good integrity and that they are complete. Otherwise, the study is not done in the right conditions. Then we do the modeling, we analyze the hotspot, and usually what we do is that we have a quality review. When we are doing an ISO LCA, this quality review is done by an external panel of experts, which allow you to communicate, because it has been peer reviewed, which confirm that the study is objective and that the results are robust. And finally, you can use the reports with a screening LCA, mostly internally, to have improvements within your value chain, and externally when it's an ISO report, because you are allowed to communicate those results. Very quickly, because I'm running out of time. Usually it takes about 6 months to conduct an LCA. The budget can be very various depending on the complexity of the products that we are looking at and the availability of the data, but usually it starts from 10K and it can go up to 30 and sometimes even 50K depending on the markets and the complexity of your products. But this is a good way to this is like a good first step for your environmental pathway. And the ISO compliant, it's exactly the same, but it usually takes a year. The panel reviewers need to get paid. So usually the prices are going up to 100K. But the main advantage is that it allows you to have a comparison, for instance, to a competitor, and then to get a high competitive advantage. That's it. I saw there were some questions. Leslie, I think I take them at the end, maybe.
Yes, we can take them maybe at the end, just to make sure that Kendra can go through.
Yep.
And I've responded a little bit in the chat as well, and I will keep doing that. But we'll hopefully have a few minutes for question at the end.
Yes.
Great. So Kendra, all yours.
Great. Can you see me yet, or are we struggling on the?
We cannot see you, but we can hear you, which is great, and we can see the slides.
Perfect. That'll do. Well, thank you for having me. So I'm Kendra. I work in sustainability at Nopla, and a key part of my job is organising LCAs across our product range. So as Leslie introduced us, Notpla is a packaging company with a difference, and we make edible, biodegradable packaging from seaweed with the goal to replace single-use plastic. And the plastic problem, I'm sure, isn't news to anyone here. We're consistently bombarded with statistics about the impact of plastic on planet and health. So yeah, if you go on to the next slide, at Notpla, we see this as the fundamental problem, that we are using a material which lasts 5 to 6 lifetimes to do a 5-minute job. So plastic isn't so much the problem as the frivolity with which we use it. So with that in mind, our co-founders look to fruit. So an apple, for instance, as nature has kind of been packaging food sustainably forever. You know, a peel lasts a matter of weeks and we eat an apple in a few minutes. So how can we replace plastics and make packaging disappear like a fruit? So our co-founders developed the Oho, which is this product here, which is an edible pouch of water or juice for drinking on the go. So our goal is to make a packaging that kind of disappears straight after use. And we're now a team of 50 designers, chemists, and engineers who are fighting against single-use plastics. And since our kind of founding, we've partnered with the likes of Lucozade for the London Marathon, which is on the next slide here. So we're targeting really kind of large contexts where single-use plastic is not necessary and in excess. And since then, we've partnered also with Heinz in the context of takeaway condiment solutions. So we encapsulate ketchup in our sachets also. And I'll just quickly talk through a few more of our product range before getting into the kind of topic at hand. So here we've developed our seaweed-based grease-proof lining for takeaway boxes, as often there's hidden plastic in the lining of these boxes, which make them uncompostable or recyclable. And we've partnered recently with Just Eat across countries in Europe and the UK in their takeaway restaurants. And another key area of single use is films. So we now have a range of seaweed-based general purpose and water-soluble films for anything from olive oil to a dissolvable sachet of your coffee for your morning commute. And a few other products in the pipeline include toothpaste pearls, so a similar technology to Oho, just a sort of micro dose of toothpaste in the top right-hand corner there. We also have our seaweed paper and our edible flavored films, as well as olive oil pipettes, so another sachet-based solution. And so yeah, that's our family tree of products, essentially. So we take the whole seaweed and we use both the extracts and the waste fibers to develop our range. And seaweed is the real hero here. It grows rapidly, about 60 centimeters a day. If you go on to the next slide, you've got a few kind of key standout facts about seaweed. So it doesn't compete with food crops for land, which is a key thing. Doesn't need fresh water or fertilizer to grow, and is also an active sequesterer of carbon. So it's a more effective sequesterer than most land biomass. If you go on to the next slide, you can see how. So when we are harvesting the seaweed, prior to harvest, 50% of that biomass breaks off during growth, and then half of that biomass, 50% of which the carbon is sequestered permanently in sediment. So that's just a quick summary basically of our product range and our materials and the power of seaweed. So to get into the subject a little more, before we begin, I'll start by saying that we're a very young company, we're 50 people. So we're in the early stages of understanding and developing our own LCA process. And a lot of work we've done previously is around testing our products in-house. So a lot of our products sort of pre-scale up. So we're developing our own in-house testing and trying to communicate the USP of our products, in particular end of life. So we test and film our products in simulated outdoor environments. So if you go on to the next slide, you can see our wormery, which gives us visual proof of the performance and integrity of our products. So on the far right, you have our Notpla material, which is gone within a matter of days, as opposed to a plastic sachet or even a bioplastic. And we do similar things in marine environments as well. So on the next slide, you can see our seaweed paper, which is using the waste fibers of seaweed and is completely additive free, breaking down in a simulated marine environment. And more recently, we've begun testing with external facilities as well. So to really delve a little more into the science behind that. And the reason I'm mentioning all of this today is because as a young company, we think this visual content marries really well with the more quantitative picture that an LCA can give us, particularly when we're in quite early days of collecting the appropriate data for full life cycle assessment. So they kind of pair really well in communicating the value of our materials. So onto LCA. So these are like sort of the main questions that jumped around when we first kicked off LCA. So seeing as it's key to us, how do we track the end of life of our products? And in particular, when do we start committing to LCAs? How do we do this on a lower budget? How do we engage everyone that needs to be involved? And what do we want to get out of it, essentially? So the real big question was, when do we start committing time and resources to this? As we have a lot of products at various stages of maturity, we laid it out a bit like this. So we've chosen to commit to a more complete picture, a more complete LCA, somewhere between scaling up and having our mass market solution. And there's been nuances to this decision around each product. So where there's a good point in time where we have a solid supply chain and less fluctuation in material sourcing. So we pick based on how strong our relationships are with our suppliers, and therefore how effectively we can begin to collect data. So one of the first assessments we did was OHO as our sort of flagship product. And the result we had was we established, by replacing a standard ketchup sachet with our material, we found a carbon reduction of 68%. And I mean, it goes without saying, really, a reduction of 100% of plastic production. And these results now form the backbone of our key performance indicators, which help show gram for gram what replacing plastic means for our climate. And this is a really valuable source of information for our clients also, like in the context of a takeaway restaurant. We can say exactly how much plastic and therefore carbon they are reducing through using our product. So I'll just dig in quickly to our process. So we start by collecting as much information as we can internally and sort of having a think about the scope, goals and functional units that were mentioned a little earlier around each product. So once we have that picture, and it's important to us that we do that internally because we have some very unique materials, and often a lot of that data isn't available at the moment. So it's important that we have as much raw data as possible. We've then gone through universities. So we've approached universities with a proposal for an LCA. So we've worked with students, or in some instances, they've approached us. So this is a kind of really great low budget way of getting access to the appropriate databases, and also industry professionals that have more of a background than we do in LCA. So we then work with them to establish scope, goals, functional unit, confirm what we've already discussed internally, and then build our inventories and draft content from there. And we keep the conversation going throughout the process. So we work quite closely with the students as a whole product team, because for us, it's as much about the team learning about the product and the process as we go, as it is about having a final document to share with stakeholders and so on. So if you go on to the next slide, this is what we aim for with an LCA for each of our products. So we go for a cradle to grave analysis, of course, really focusing in on that end of life area as well. Again, as Isabel mentioned, we're doing a comparative analysis. So it's really important to us as we're trying to replace a conventional material. So it's important we benchmark ourselves against like the market leading material in a particular context, for instance, films, sachets, and so on. And we've so far looked into a number of different metrics, from land use and land use degradation through to, of course, emissions, ecotoxicity, eutrophication. And we've also touched on more recently the difference between biogenic versus anthropogenic carbon. So as seaweed is a biogenic material, how can we differentiate the different carbon cycles within our process, as well as looking at health as well. So human health, as microplastics and information around microplastics comes more to light and how they affect our health. You know, that they've been found in human blood, for instance. How can we harness this information to really ring home how important it is to have natural materials and natural packaging solutions, in particular in the context of food and food takeaway packaging. So yeah, working with universities, working with students so far has been really quite insightful and engaging way of doing LCA, and of course, very low budget. However, we have found some caveats there as well. So it's harder to ensure the quality of the end product through this process because you're sort of committing working with people who are also learning. So you can't always be as confident in the end result. And we've worked with students that have approached us and also partnered with university industry placement programs, which is the route I'd recommend, as the lecturers and industry professionals are often a lot more hands-on when you've kind of applied to be part of their program. And in that way, we can make sure we're using the correct methodologies and the correct processes, which is, next slide, please, really important for the verifying the LCA and meeting the ISO standards. So in order to make sure we use the right methodologies, etc. And whilst this is quite early days for us, so I can't really discuss it too much because we're still in the learning process, but our plan is to go through the university system again to verify our assessments, or rather look into getting our LCA peer reviewed through this route. So yeah, that's a little bit of an insight into the avenues we've chosen so far. So our key learnings really is to make sure everyone is on board, engage your supply chain as far in advance as possible, because sometimes we found that this information can be quite hard to collect. So the sooner you start that conversation, the better. Yeah, don't be too positive when you're estimating things. I think it's important to be conservative in your estimates. I think a glowing report at the end of the day isn't super useful. I think it's better to have an assessment in which you can really pick out key areas to learn from. And where you can't find the data, I think, you know, whilst it's better to have everything there, it's sometimes not possible to have all the data. But we found that even in an incomplete assessment, we are learning lots about areas where we need to understand our products further and better scrutinize our processes. Yeah, so that's a little insight into what we're doing, and I hope that's been useful. Obviously, we're still really excited to be quite early days in our LCA journey. But if you have any questions, just let me know.
Thanks a lot. And we got some questions in the chat, which we addressed, but just for the recording as well, for some of the people that in the US that asked for the recording, regarding some of the questions, the point is really to say from the discussion today that LCAs are really made for any product and any services. It can be suited to the exact need that you need as a portfolio company. So whatever the size, the sector, the stage, I mean, as we said, at some point, too early doesn't really make sense, but can still, I mean, there's other ways to do it, like hotspot as well. But really it can be suited to whatever the sector, the need you have. And indeed, the discussion today was also only focused on environmental, if you think about ESG, because it's only about environmental LCA. But there are other ways of also social LCAs, but it's not something that we do and that we've been going through for portfolio companies. So at Astanor, for 3 planet impact KPIs, we use environmental LCAs. If you have any remaining questions, please, you can go and ask in the chat. If not, I mean, you can always reach the three of us. I'm sure we'll be happy to help if we can through the journey, your journey of sustainability. So if there is no more question, I think we can thank you for your time. Is there any another one?
There is just one. Woodworking with university necessitate commercial or ownership discussion on knowledge or IP. At Quantis, we usually work directly with the companies, but we can also work sometimes because we are like all the works that we do is based on scientific literature. So we are used to work with the other organism, but indeed for intellectual property and knowledge, I don't really know. Like I think Nopla would better answer this question based on their experience. At Quantis, we sign agreements with the company that we work with so as to make sure that the intellectual property is guaranteed. But I guess that this is maybe something that you can negotiate with universities as well.
Yeah, so just to add to that, so prior to committing to the LCA with the university team, we'd sign, of course, an NDA and also agree the terms, so exactly what will be released and published once the final LCA is complete. So we can remove specific sensitive data or information.
And there was one question of the recommended from the option mentioned, like internal LCA, universities or mix. And I think it really depends of the need of the company. I think there's always the question of price, as Kendra mentioned. And what we've done with our portfolio companies is mostly through experts like Quantis or Ecometrics, but as we've done, as Notla went through universities, that depends of the need, this depends of what you can see what's in the market as well. So it's really a discussion that needs to happen internally with your investors, if you have an impact investors as well on the cap table. So it's really a discussion. So it's difficult to say what is the best, but indeed at some point you need an expert like Quantis to come into the game, either it's at the beginning or at the end, but indeed it will need to be certified or externally reviewed at some point. And what worked really well at some time is to get Quantis to kick off, to get the knowledge internally. Then the team hires someone, an expert that can take the initial work, the preliminary work from Quantis, and then that build the capabilities and the knowledge in-house. And so Quantis can become like kind of a teacher in a way to the portfolio companies. So it is really different ways, but that's something that's always been very valuable for all our portfolio companies.
Yes, this has really well worked with some companies. We do the first LCA because it's difficult and we get the energy to collect all the data, and then we train some people within the company that are well acknowledged with these notions and that are able to use the models that we have developed and feed them in the future. There was another question in the chat. So regarding the PEF, so the product environmental footprint, it is not mandatory in Europe, but it is largely used, and more companies that are sending requirements to their suppliers are asking for LCA following this methodology rather than any other methodology. But I know that there are specificities depending on the region of the world. So in Japan specifically, I don't know which is the one that is mostly used. But PEF is quite popular. There is another one that is called World Impact World Plus and Impact 2002 Plus. There are two methodologies that are also usually recognized by companies and clients.
Great. So I think we are reaching time. If there is no more question, thank you so much, everyone, for attending the webinar. And thank you, Isabelle. Thank you, Kendra, for joining. And we hope this was helpful to understand the benefits of LCAs on every aspects and for on both sides of being investors and as a startup. So thank you very much and have a really good end of the day.
Thank you, Leslie. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.